Hello and welcome to the Podio Slave podcast. It's May 28th, 2020, and I'm here again with Anthony and Nate. My name is Tony. How you guys doing tonight?
Doing good, man. I've been looking forward to this as usual all week. We had a great episode with Scott Russo last week, and back this week with some original content. I've been doing good. How about you, Nate?
Yeah, same. I was really stoked about the interview we did with Scott Russo on Written Law. That was really awesome last week, and been looking forward to this too. Had my birthday week this week, so it's kind of a birthday special. Cranking some beers with you guys and talking music. The best of all worlds.
Hell yeah, man! Happy birthday, by the way. That's awesome. And yeah, shout out to Scott. That was a fun conversation last week. We had a lot of fun talking to him, and kind of going through our history with the band and all that fun stuff. So a lot of fun with that. So to get started here, we're just going to direct you guys to the socials like we usually do. If you haven't checked us out on there, on Instagram and on Twitter, we are at Podioslave. And then on Gmail, we are at podioslavepodcast@gmail.com. So hit us up if you want to, throw some stuff out there. We heard from some people this week that we're pretty excited about. Dan M in Florida is listening. Thanks, man. Much appreciated. We heard from Brett in Australia, so going a little international flavor. So thanks, Brett, for reaching out to us on Instagram. And we had a really cool email from Chip. I got a little misty-eyed here at home. It was a little dusty at home when I read that email. That was really cool to hear. So thank you, Chip, for tossing out some nerdery with us in the email. That being said, I'm going to throw it to Twan for the set list for tonight.
For tonight, we got a few news headlines we want to touch upon, including Corey Taylor. Also, as you probably heard, Joe Rogan signed a big deal with Spotify. Also, indie musicians and how they're hanging in there with the whole COVID and potentially asking Congress for relief. And then also, I know we kind of teased this on the Instagram, which was a throwback concert to 15 years ago. Both Tony and Nate, you guys saw U2 down at the Garden. We'll recap that. And then the big thing for tonight, which I'm super, super, super stoked on, which is we're going to do a deep dive on 3 albums that turned 20 this year. I won't give them away quite yet. You'll have to kind of wait in there and at the end of the episode and see what we picked. But yeah, that's kind of what we're looking at. With that, do you guys want to get right into the first headline?
Yeah, I was just thinking about it, when you were talking about live music, and one of the things that we were kind of curious about is moshing is apparently going to be full on banned from any future concerts. We're a little older, so I think we've kind of not grown past that phase. We just have a little bit more liability now with injury, so we don't jump in the mosh pit anymore per se. But I thought that was kind of interesting, just because there's a lot of ground rules being laid down on all fronts, and then live music, now you're kind of restricted to apparently not mosh anymore. What do you guys think about that?
Well, it was not only no moshing, but no crowd surfing or no stage diving. So basically it's a no contact sport.
Yeah.
So I know a lot of shows that I've gone to growing up and even recently, they're not in real venues. They're in skate parks, they're in halls or VFW halls, and there'd be no one there to police that. In fact, those shows wouldn't even happen if those rules were enforced. They would just, you do a streaming live concert over that, as opposed to just standing there.
Yeah, I can't imagine a world where we're back at shows and there is moshing right now. I mean, it's going to be everybody keep your distance. You're not going to have 10 people sidling up to the bar with, 5 people behind all of them trying to get drinks. It's just going to be a different world for a little while when we get back to shows. That being said, can you imagine wearing that suit? Did you guys see that suit they put out on the internet this week?
Oh, man.
That COVID suit to go to shows? That would be nuts. I already sweat my ass off at those things anyway.
That's how weird it's getting. Yeah. It's now you are restricted to stand or watch. It's almost maybe it'll go back to all seated shows for everything. But in a spread out fashion to kind of support the hazmat suit that Tone's referencing, you'll have to pause this episode and Google it. Just put in concert hazmat suit or something similar to that, and you'll see what we're talking about. It's pretty wild. It's very futuristic. Is this from the movie Tron? What's going on here? Is this real life? The dynamics of live music are changing, I guess, per se. We don't really know. This is all kind of future forward thinking statements in terms of when things do kind of go back to any kind of normal state live music wise. But yeah, the mosh pit thing. You know, we're all in our mid 30s, and like, none of us are violent people. But and I don't think moshing is really violent. It is if you don't really understand what's going on. But it's really actually kind of everyone's really together in this like aggressive behavior as one unit. Like people will pick you up if you fall down. It's not really me against you. It's like, hey, let's all thrash to this music, and if someone drops, pick them up. So there's a lot of unity there.
Yeah, but there's always that one guy, right? He's kicking, he's doing cartwheels, and he's throwing elbows, and that's the guy. We want that guy to go away. But and actually, if you want to see a breakdown of this, I was watching a YouTube video earlier today. It's an old one. Brian, you guys are familiar with the comedian Brian Posehn, right?
Yeah,
he's a big metalhead.
Big metal guy.
So Metal by Numbers. Go check that video out. It's a great kind of representation of
I know what you're talking.
All of it. It's such an awesome video. I'll tweet it out later. It's great. It's an awesome video.
Well, the thing is with I'm just thinking back to the concert hazmat suit. Mm-hmm. I thought it was like an Onion article or Hard Times parody thing, but no, there's a company that's like prototyping and mocking these up. And I was just thinking like the economics of it, like they wouldn't make it disposable, right? I mean, that'd be way too much money. So they're intended to be reused. Are you going to put that on after some sweaty guy that, just got out of a Slayer show? He wore that. And just like the cost of it, like do you rent it? I don't see it working. Like this is too short term, I think, for anyone to be investing that type of money in. But,
No, I mean, what I read is it is in fact a reusable unit, so it is something that you'll essentially lease for the show. And yeah, clearly they're going to do some kind of intense, thorough, cleaning, sanitation of this hazmat suit. But it's just super bizarre, and I thought it was a joke too. And then I researched the company, and they already have ties into the music industry. They have contracts for production setups and stuff for existing artists. So they already have a foot in the door. So it's not like they're just a random startup. Yeah, it's.
I would want my own. I don't know about you guys. I would want my own.
BYOS, bring your own suit.
Yeah, bring your own suit. Hazmat till I die, bro.
Well, like, are they one size fits all? There's like so many questions that it's like, why bother?
Yeah.
Well, I would have fit into a different size suit before the quarantine. Yeah.
Apparently, there's a capability to add vape and beverage, so clearly beverage alcohol, units to the suit, so you can actually consume. There's like a little portal where you kind of twist and these things kind of some way flow into the suit. It's very bizarre, man. Very weird.
That's Onion article shit.
Yeah.
Really is. You're right. It really is.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was going to say, getting back to like banning moshing and whatnot, that's to limit the contact between people, obviously. And I think certain shows, it just would be weird. I'm sure some genres of music would just choose not to do it. But then others, that wouldn't affect them. They would just not mosh just like they would, pre-COVID.
Yeah, I had Bon Iver tickets for this summer, and I doubt there was going to be much moshing at that show.
No.
Probably not.
Just hazmat chilling.
Yeah, right. Except for that one guy, right? He's just doing karate kicks.
You're right, though. There is that one uber violent guy that's what people associate moshing with, which is, these aggressive psychopathic people that are in there trying to kill people. It's like, no, it's actually not the case. Well, there is that occasion that there's that one guy in there that's super pissed, or girl that's super pissed, or whatever. I've gotten roughed up in a mosh pit before, but it's all smiles, man. It's a good time.
Yeah, the guy crowd punching and all that stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, or your metal show things that you're talking about with people in there with like medieval weapons or something.
Oh, the Bad Luck 13, right? Extravaganza. Yeah.
And I got punched in a pit once, but it was because I hit the guy so hard he was trying to catch my shirt on his way down. That was head PE at the station back in the day. Right in the middle of waiting to die, I just kind of chucked this guy, and he didn't see it and went flying and threw his arm up and punched me right in the eye. Yeah, not anymore. No more of that.
Yeah,
so we want to. Go ahead.
I was going to say, speaking of like moshing concerts where moshing is part of the culture, is Slipknot, and Corey Taylor.
My mind.
We're always reading each other's minds, us three here. But yeah, Corey Taylor kind of fits into this realm with the fact that Slipknot is very much a staple metal band, and moshing and crowd participation in the show is very much part of the show. So yeah, Corey Taylor was in the news. I guess he's utilizing this time to write what has already actually been written prior, but kind of letting it know and being known to the public that he wrote a solo album. So that's really cool because we all really like and appreciate what he does, and he's a gifted songwriter, and he's actually got quite the range for singing melodic material. So I thought that was really, really cool. What about you guys?
Yeah, I think for me, I had two thoughts. One was, is this going to be Stone Sour Jr.? Right, that's one path. The other thought I had was, I don't know if you guys saw like the news with Slipknot in the last like 6 months, but they have a shelved album that's supposedly in the vein of Radiohead. So then my head goes, well, is this solo thing going to be Radiohead Jr.? So Stone Sour Jr. or Radiohead Jr. Either way, I'm in. I'm in. Yeah.
That's quite the range. I know, Nate, we met Corey back probably 4 or 5 years ago in Portland before a Stone Sour show, and you nailed it. Like the dude's voice, and we've seen him both with Stone Sour and with Slipknot. All three of us have seen him with Slipknot. The dude's range is uncanny. Like he really can, and he's not a big guy. Like he's probably 5'6", and just the amount of noise that he can produce, and the levels that he can hit. Like this solo thing could go any way, and I'm definitely here for it. Like I want to hear what he's got in store for all of us, because the dude can just do no wrong in my eyes as far as music goes.
Yeah, and he writes from the heart too. We were talking about that with Scott Russo. Is like the reason some of this music becomes so large is because you can kind of differentiate what's real and what's not. And Corey's speaking from the heart and writing from the heart, and some of the songs are extremely brutal, and some are just super melodic and love songs and breakup songs, and that's why Corey Taylor's a class act. I mean, I'm excited for it. It'll be interesting to see what happens. I know his influences include people like Trent Reznor, and that kind of fits the vein of Trent's with Nine Inch Nails, like super heavy music, but also some really complex and sometimes simplistic lyrics that lend itself right or left or straight or back. There's really no way to just put it in a box.
And there's melody with both of those guys, right? There's and people don't often think that with Slipknot or often think that with Nine Inch Nails, but go do your homework. There's absolutely some melody there, and that's why we love those guys.
Yeah.
Well, I associate solo albums with being more on the acoustic side, which I would actually be more into that than if he had a backing band. Because if you think about like Bother, that shows, I mean, that he carries that song with his vocals. The other thing I was thinking about is he's 45? How old is he?
Somewhere around there.
Yeah.
I'll look it up. Go ahead.
So a dude like that is going to lose his range at some point. So like now's the time. I think this is like the twilight of when I think he could do this. So I think the stars are aligning. And if it was the quarantine that tipped it off, then I mean, we benefit from that.
46.
46.
Oh, well. I think you're right, Twan.
Because even like when I saw him last summer, there were some notes he couldn't hit for Slipknot.
I could see that too, because he did do some solo tours where he would do some Slipknot songs, some Stone Sour songs, some covers. So he actually did cover "Hurt" by Nine Inch Nails, and he played a Pearl Jam song. He played "Black" actually, which Pearl Jam songs have quite the range as well. So there was a teaser that he was going to do something solo, but these solo tours were like small clubs, like 600 cap like clubs tours, kind of off the cuff. I think at one point he was like promoting a book that he put out. He's also an author, and he just did like a solo tour, him and an acoustic guitar, to just, hey, I'm on the road anyway, I might as well do this. The kind of work ethic that he has, which is really cool. But yeah, if it goes that route where it really is just him and a guitar, like it's one of the few instances where someone from like some giant act will it's something we actually would gravitate towards, I think.
And he fits that mold of can't sit still, right? I mean, you look at guys like him, Dave Grohl, Trent Reznor. Their hands are always in something. So writing a book or doing a music sound, a movie soundtrack like Reznor does, or Dave just, here's my Instagram stories. I'm just gonna write stories, and there's always something going with those guys. Yeah. I do remember part of that Stone Sour show, Nate. He did a little acoustic by himself. And that was awesome. So if it's an acoustic album that we get from Corey Taylor, that's fucking great. I'm in.
Well, you guys sent a YouTube video of Corey doing some acoustic cover. What was that?
Yep.
you remember what song that was you sent?
I think it was Nine Inch Nails, right?
I can't
Yeah,
remember.
you sent it, Nate. I'm pretty sure it was a Nail song. It might have been The Becoming or The Fragile, one of those.
Something You Can't Have or something like that.
And it was just really good. It was a big sing along, and
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing. Like, he's singing so passionately. It's like an Eddie Vedder or like a Trent Reznor or like anyone that's like there's so much emotion into it. That's why Slipknot works. You know, Corey is definitely a big part of that for sure. But yeah, solo, man, I can't wait for that stuff. Be cool. But like each one, I actually I do hope it's just him and a guitar and something super simplistic, because then it will be Stone Sour Jr.
Something I Can Never Have, Nine Inch Nails song. From,
Okay, that's what I thought.
Oh boy, what album is that from? Why am I
Fragile.
drawing a blank?
That's
Yeah,
Fragile.
Fragile.
That's crazy, man. Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. Other music that other little topics that are kind of going in that route. Clutch doing a live stream, right?
Last night, right?
That was last night, yeah.
With Crowbar and it was from the Doom Saloon, I think is what they called it, which is a track from I think Psychic Warfare.
Oh wow.
I love Crowbar. That's a
Love
cool,
Clutch.
That's a cool show then. And it was definitely live. It wasn't like a re-recording.
Yeah.
I didn't see it. I wanted to watch it. I didn't get home in time, and then I crashed.
Yeah, no, they performed like live. That's a kind of first a little teaser of like, you know, what route it might go towards. That we all hope not, but because Clutch is also an energetic show. It kind of goes to that moshing thing. It's like Clutch is a show like meant to be played in clubs and theaters and like drinking a strong IPA and just like grooving with the music. Like, I don't know if I can really watch that online, so I didn't catch it either. But I thought it was interesting that it was a band that we actually do like doing something like that.
So a couple months back, I know Anthony and I both have an Oculus, one of those virtual reality, and they have events on there. And Clutch was an event, and I remember, Twan, did you go to it?
I missed it. Totally missed it.
I went. I watched like 3. I think I caught it like maybe 10 minutes in, so I missed maybe a song or two, and I watched the rest of it, and it was pretty good. Like, I mean, I would much rather be there. And we saw them like 5 or 6 years ago this month in Portland. And I would much rather have been in person. That was a blast. That was for the Earth Rocker. Yep. They were out for Earth Rocker, and that album was just badass. And it'd be cool to see them in person again. But it was, it wet my whistle as far as seeing Clutch. And, I'm at home on my couch, and I was able to have a couple beers and not worry about driving home. So,
man, don't like it. Don't make it happen.
No, I mean, but in the meantime, I'm into it. Like, thank you for giving me something to look at,
Yeah.
But the big story with that show was not the show itself, but they released a limited edition T-shirt. Was it? Did the shirt reference the show, or was it? I didn't see the shirt.
I think so. Yep, it did. And like everything on their website went for sale too for the last couple of days, like 48-hour sale too.
Wow.
So that's like, again, I feel like in an early episode, go back and listen. I feel like we called this where it's like everything's going to be catered to this, quarantine live show, limited merch. Like, the bands are going to have to be creative in terms of two things: one, generating revenue, and two, keeping fans' attention. Because like, if you're not playing live, a lot of these bands, they're not getting revenue. And keeping fans' attention, if you're not in the limelight with a lot of these bands on socials or whatnot, you're out of sight, out of mind.
Yeah, and it's already the struggle to stay relevant as a band. So now with this, I mean, I can only imagine what it might be like. And to your point, the merchandise was the main driver for this kind of live stream show. And it's actually not for them. It's actually to pay, or at least to have some of the revenue go towards their road crew, which really are kind of stuck in a hard place because that is their whole livelihood is touring. So good on them to do that. And anyone that's, creating any kind of platform for ancillary businesses. Yeah.
And the other thing with that, we kind of joked about this in our pre-production. So their set was like 55 minutes long. And I mean, is that not perfect live album length, right? Like, so, okay, here's the vinyl. It's on like marble, black and white, whatever. Do you want to buy this for $30? Yep, I'm in. Like, it's a quarantine sessions. I'll buy that. Yeah, I love this band.
Wow.
And that's the type of thing that they would probably release on a couple different colorways, but they probably wouldn't repress it. Like you would go into it knowing one press, maybe 3 colorways, and that's it. So it adds to the limited, like the whole Supreme streetwear, like it's all limited and it hypes up the demand. But I'm in for it.
Record Store Day 2021, Clutch's Quarantine Sessions comes out. We called it. Just remember that. That's a year from now. We called it right here.
What episode was it? It was episode 12 on the Patio Slave podcast. Tony called it.
Yep.
Give him credit.
That's coming. And I'll be in line for it. I'll be in line with all my music nerds when we're back talking to each other again in person.
Wow.
I like the move though. Like it's all this stuff is tip of the iceberg, because once one band does it, another one's gonna be like, oh well, that was successful for Clutch. We're broke, and we need to do something.
Oh, and another thing too on if this happens with your prediction, Tone, is now there's so many ways to garnish any kind of metrics that would make that pressing valid. Like, oh, we're gonna do a 45,000x press for this vinyl release because we know that's like a pretty strong core following out of our overall following that will actually buy this, and that'll be a great ROI, and maybe even be I don't know, 25% of what we would make in the year for touring or something like that. There's so many ways to gauge metrics now, Spotify and YouTube and so forth.
Well, and I liken it to one of those like live in studio type things. So instead of getting the crowd noise, you're just like, that like Zeppelin BBC sessions where it's live and they're all playing together at once, but there's no crowd noise or not, or minimal crowd noise or whatever. And you get a live album that, they were able to put together with, their sound stuff and all that, jazz as far as that stuff goes. So it's just a different way for a band like them, an indie band, which we'll get to in just a second, more indie bands, but an indie band like them to continue to be viable and get stuff to their fans and, change the game a little bit in these uncertain times. I love it. I think it's a great idea.
Well, the other thing they can do is they can auction off the test press, and say, hey, this, we'll throw it up on eBay, whatever. All proceeds go to the road crew, go to the sound guys. But kind of like getting back to the whole supply and demand thing of like limited and whatnot, kind of a tangent here, but the band Terror, I saw today, released a Terror-themed slides, like the flip-flop things, the slides.
Yep.
Yeah, Terror slides. It's like, would they have come up with those if we weren't in quarantine? No. They're trying to be creative. So it's like, what's next? Like Clutch slides?
Wow.
I buy Clutch slides.
Clutch gym shorts?
I would buy Clutch gym shorts. I have a Clutch sweatshirt. I have a T-shirt. I have a hat. Yeah, and I have a bunch of records. So I guess I would buy those things too, especially if it's going to a good cause. You're right. Test pressing is a great idea because Run the Jewels just announced their pre-order. Their album comes out in like a week, and they had test pressings that went for a ton of money. And if they're using that money to go towards taking care of their own, awesome. For people that can do it. Like I'm a person right now who can do it because I'm working. Yeah. I will. That's awesome.
But it wasn't until we talk about this in past episodes. It's not until you get older when you realize the economics of being in a band. Like as fans, if we want these bands to continue full time, there's got to be a little give and take, or there's no give and take, and you just accept that you're not getting a new album or you're not going to see these guys live.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we talked about the Patreons, right? Like a lot of those bands are doing that to try to, indie bands especially, and that leads us to our next story, right? The indie bands, there's about 700 of them, I think, indie bands and artists that have petitioned Congress for some help, kind of like a small business, because that's what they are, right? They're all small businesses. So this is a way for them to try to, again, stay viable during this time and stay active and continue to be able to produce for fans. And it's another way, they're asking for a little bit of help from the government. So, and they're giving money out to friggin' Steak and Shake. They can't give it to, Modern Baseball or one of those type of bands. So it's kind of crazy, but I get it. I get why they're doing it. They're a small business.
Yeah, no, to what Tone's referencing is over 700 independent musicians signed an open letter to ask Congress for COVID-19 relief. So the way I look at this is kind of similar to independent mom and pop restaurants that are basically being ordered to shut down, while places like Target, Walmart, Amazon are just thriving. And I know this is different restaurant to like a big box retailer. But it just goes to show like there's definitely some politics going into, hey, keep these big guys alive, and maybe the small guys just kind of shelter in place for a while. Well, for musicians, if you're well off and you're a stadium rocker, like you're pretty well off no matter what. Whereas the small people, like smaller bands, are having a hard time making ends meet. So they're looking for some kind of stimulus and way to stay afloat. And the Clutch thing's a good example of ways to generate revenue for roadies and so forth. For these small bands, like how does that work, and where does that line blur? I don't know.
No, I think you nailed it. Getting back to the infrastructure and using the mom and pop restaurants and the big box is actually a good example, because you got the Olive Gardens of the world that can spin up a curbside to go system, whether it's online or whatnot. But the mom and pop guy, they can't. So they're relying on foot traffic to come in, but they can't open up. So with that kind of parallel, yeah, like Foo Fighters is fine. They can survive this. But if you're Modern Baseball or Circus Survive, I think those are a couple of the bands that were in that article. Yeah, I mean, I get it. But the other question I'd ask is, are they eligible for the $1,200 stimulus? Can they double dip?
Probably. I mean, it depends on how much they make a year, right? That was how that was determined. So
yeah,
if they're a big enough band that they're making more than that 100K threshold, then maybe they don't get it. And if that's the case, then maybe do like what Clutch did and try to help out your people around you. But if they're small, asking for a Patreon type of band that probably makes 40 to 80K a year, then they probably get the stimulus too.
But that, again, that's not, depending on where they live, that doesn't go far. That doesn't go very far.
Oh God, no. Yeah, you're right. Especially depending on where they live. But even here, it wasn't much.
Yeah, that's your rent. That for a lot of people wouldn't even cover their rent for 1 month, depending on where you live. But I don't know. I'd have to read more into it to kind of fully gauge an opinion. But I do get it. If you're a band that is full time per se, you're reliant on touring and whatnot, and people are saying you can't do it. I get it.
Yeah.
Totally get it.
Yeah, it puts the brakes on the big, and we've referenced it so many times in this podcast, that touring, live shows, which we all adore here, and is why we made this podcast in the first place, is the lead generator for revenue on all fronts, with the exception of maybe licensee deals to an extent. I mean, if you run an advertisement during Super Bowl with like a Black Keys song for a Chevy commercial, like that's a big paycheck. But that aside, you know what I mean? You still have to be kind of in that ballpark to get those kind of contracts in the first place. So yeah, indies it's difficult, man. And not everyone's there. And I think the future is just presenting itself opportunities to maybe pivot. And what we're doing here as a podcast, it's not a revenue stream for us, but it is for some people. And one of those people is Joe Rogan, who just signed with Spotify for an exclusive.
It's just a tiny little revenue stream for him.
Tiny, 100 million or something a year. No big deal.
Something like that.
Did we get the final on the dollar amount? I just heard it was over 100 million, but I didn't hear the time frame over how many years, or if that was 1 year. I don't know.
I don't know. I'll look it up as we're talking, but yeah, that he signed with Spotify. He's going to be exclusively Spotify by the end of the year. In the meantime, it'll be on most platforms until at least the fall, right? And then he'll try to pivot everything over. And even the YouTube page where a lot of people watch it will be through Spotify. So they won't be on YouTube anymore, which is, YouTube is probably licking their wounds like, oh my God, not that Google's hard up, but that's a big loss for them. I mean, a lot of people watch that podcast that way, right? I mean, I know you guys do.
Huge. I mean, I haven't listened to him on Apple Podcasts in ages. It's all YouTube, and it's all the algorithm that suggests it. So I'm scrolling through YouTube. I do, every night before I go to bed, I feel like, and it suggested a Tony Hawk clip from his recent interview on Rogan, and it was a 10-minute clip, light watch, put it on in the background. But if he moves to Spotify, I'm not getting that. So I think his total listenership goes down, but it does bring people. It will 100% bring people over to the Spotify platform.
And that's what's trying to happen, right? Spotify's trying to do that, right? They're trying to kind of gobble up the podcast market, and they're doing a great job with it. I mean, this is a big fish. like the biggest probably. And this is music adjacent. Obviously, it's not something that we're typically into, but we're podcasters. We're in the forum. We use Spotify to upload. Like, bring Big Daddy Joe over so they can find us. Like, we're cool with that. I don't have any problem with using Joe Rogan to find what we do. He got Tony Hawk. We'll get him next week. It's all good. But they asked him how much in the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times, and he said, "I'm weirdly richer, and it feels dirty. I don't want to talk about it." So the details of the number are still kind of murky as far as that goes.
Well, the rumor was he was making $26 million from YouTube, or no, not from YouTube, from the podcast, like in 2019. So that tells me that at the very, very most, this deal is worth 3 years, which would be 33 mil. But he'd have to. It could be 1 year. It could be Howard Stern money.
Which is nuts. That's a lot of money for 1 year, and good for him. I mean, that sets him up. Not that he's not set, because he's obviously one of the OG podcasters that's been doing it for a long time. But he's $100 million for a year is just bonkers money.
It's just, yeah, it's crazy. I mean, my mind's spinning right now because he's actually a comedian by trade. He's not a journalist. But his podcast is just so good, so detail oriented, and just the guests he gets on, the conversations that are on there they're legendary. They change stocks, right? A reference to Elon Musk on his first one. Yeah, I mean, it just goes to show that maybe he knows internally that, wow, I'm not going to be able to do stand-up comedy for a long time, and this is something I've been plugging away with my podcast for the last 10 plus years. And now I got this contract, and now, to your point, Twan, he is basically the new Howard Stern, and probably will be for a very long time, because he's just so good, and he gets everyone. It's amazing.
He does get everybody, and if there's going to be a big interview, he has it, and if it's not somebody that you would think is a big interview, he makes them a big interview. So he's kind of the what Stern was 10, 15. When Stern started with Sirius, he's what Stern was there. Like, he was on 4 days a week, and he would get the big names, and he turned into this big interviewer of everybody, where now Rogan's doing that and kind of setting the dialogue as far as that stuff goes in a format that has no way to, you can do whatever you want. It could be 5 minutes, it could be an hour, it could be 3 hours, like he does. So I always look at those and I think, oh yeah, 3 hours is long, but I'm going to break it up. Like, I'm not going to listen to it in one sitting, and I have no problem checking this one out. So that's, if he's got somebody on that I'm interested in, I absolutely throw it on there. That Homme one was really good when he had Josh Homme on, and it was fun to listen to those guys just kind of bullshit for 2.5 hours,
Well, the thing that I find interesting, and I would love to get down to the economics of the numbers. So say it is for 2 years, just say conservative, 2 years, 100 million, that's 50 million a year. That is a shitload of subscriptions that Spotify has to net new. Getting Rogan on is a loss leader. That is, we're going to take a loss to get people on the platform. It's this whole thing with like Netflix, where they'll have huge budget shows, which they'll lose money on, but collectively it does get eyeballs on the platform. But the difference there is you can listen to Spotify for free without ads. So I get it's a long-term play. It's definitely a loss leader, though. They're not going to make money right off the bat.
Yeah, that might change. I think you just brought up a good point that might change, where it's not just a, free for all, and that'll kind of pivot towards the paywall we've referenced prior. That it's going to all of a sudden be like, hey, it was free. I think times have changed, and now we have this amazing content.
So yeah, and he said that his podcast isn't going to change. So what he does is going to continue to be what he does, which is good if you're a fan of what he does. And a lot of people are. I mean, he's been going for 10, 12 years, and he's got 1,400 episodes, 1,450 or whatever. So he's not going to per se change. There'll be ads in the front of his podcast like there are now. I mean, if you doesn't matter where you grab them, whatever platform, is like 5 to 7 minutes of ads, and then you start the podcast. So, and then there's some at the end, right? Like most podcasts do that. Not here yet at the Potty Slate podcast, but hey, we'll take you. We're in, man. Call us. Hit us up on Gmail.
We plug so many beers.
Yeah, we have plugged a lot. We love beer. I mean, if anybody brew-wise wants to, I'm drinking a Swish right now, Bissell. Come on, Petey, let's go. But yeah, his podcast, I believe, will stay the same. I can't imagine they're gonna want to fuck with it, because he's obviously been super successful. So it's going to continue to be what he is. And just, you're right, it's a loss leader. He's going to cost them so much money, but the hope is you bring in 1 million people, right? Or millions of people to listen to that.
Well, at least for me, and I don't know how others consume his podcast, but it is a bite-size. It's in bite-sized segments. It's in the, Tony Hawk 10-minute segment about how everyone called him a sellout. Like, I'm clicking on that. Am I going to go, try to look for that? Oh, I guess I wouldn't even know about it, if it was on Spotify. I don't know. It's interesting. I would love to fast forward to like a year from now to see how this plays out, because he won't be from like an eyeballs perspective, he'll be in front of less eyeballs without YouTube.
So, and Spotify, we've mentioned this in episodes past, Spotify wants you to stay in app, right? They're going to just want you to stay there. So there'll be a video service that comes out of this from them, where maybe you've got whatever band, U2, here's a live video of them doing something wherever, you know what I mean? And here's, or a piece of a show that they got cameras on stage. And then you've got the Rogan podcast, and you can get to it that way. Like you're going to have a Spotify app on your Apple TV or your Amazon Fire Stick or any of those things in the very near future, where you can just stream and watch the video. They're going to make it so that you can have it the way you've been having it, just through them. They want you to stay in-house. I
think the play, you heard it here first, they buy, I'm not going to say Twitch, because I think someone else already owns Twitch, but like they'll buy something else, and they'll embed
Vimeo. They're going to buy Vimeo.
They'll buy Vimeo, and they'll embed it into the platform.
Daily Motion, and just make it better.
Yeah. So as you say, Tone, they want you to stay in app, just like Facebook does, just like they all do. Yeah, I'm here with popcorn, waiting to see how this unravels.
Yeah. Yep.
There's so many predictions we've made on this, and as you were talking, Tone, I was just like putting the graphic in front of me, like, yeah, no, this seems like that could go. This could be their 5-year game, like business plan behind curtains. Like, Spotify has a pretty substantial platform currently, but YouTube has no competition. It's amazing. Mm-hmm. I don't count Vimeo at all, you know what I mean, or Twitch even. So therefore, yeah, Spotify might just be like, boom, we're going to do videos too now. And, we got Rogan interviewing Bono, and now everything that's ever been recorded by U2 on YouTube is now obviously property of the band, but now has to be exclusively on Spotify. So anything U2 related gets pulled, almost like a Napster gets pulled for a Metallica bootleg type thing. I mean, who knows, man? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The ramifications of this are going to be felt for a while, just like the COVID stuff, right? We're going to see, this is a changing in landscape as far as podcasting goes. And podcasting has obviously become very big. We're able to do it pretty without a ton of buy-in as far as what we've done. And I feel like we're doing what we can, and it sounds good. So, a lot of people can do that if they pay a little attention to detail and find ways to market themselves and promote themselves like we have, and others, obviously. But yeah, he's the king of it right now, and he just totally jumped into the pool from the deep end, cannonball style, and threw some ripples everywhere, right? It's a different world now.
Actually, speaking of ripples, here's a take that's not hot at all. This will happen.
Super cold takes.
Joe Budden is going to get paid. So he signed, I think he was the first one to go exclusive with Spotify, and he's on, if you look at all the charts, he's right up there. I love that podcast. I've seen the podcast live. If you told me 20 years ago when I found out about Joe Budden, I would see his podcast in 19 years, I would be like, wait, what? The Pump It Up guy? Yeah, him. Okay. Well, he was the first one to sign with Spotify, and it was small money. When his contract's up, he's getting paid. Or else he's walking.
Yeah, and he'll go to YouTube or whoever wants to decide they want to throw their hat in the ring on this. And The Ringer, Bill Simmons, the sports guy, one of the biggest podcasts in the world as well. He's on the Ringer was bought by Spotify back in February for almost $200 million. So there's some money being thrown around in this game. And hey, we're here. We don't need all of that. We just need some of it.
Man, it's exciting times though, because it's so much cleaner. It's so much less bias. These free platforms that allow you to kind of utilize your rights and have freedom of speech and not be censored by regular network television and all these things. But we've been kind of riding these things for a long time. Podcasts have been around for a while. They're just starting to become a little bit more mainstream now, at least in terms of like a mainstream audience. But but nothing's more mainstream than this next band. that we're gonna reference, and that's U2, right?
Yeah.
My
Oh
birthday.
yeah, good call. Yeah, that was. Man, I mean, Nate, you say it was your 21st birthday, so I want you to take the reins on this one. Give us where you were, how it went down, and then I'll give you my side.
I mean, a lot of people know U2. Everyone knows U2. I feel like you
Yeah,
either
if you
love
don't
them.
know you two, why are you listening to us?
Yeah.
I mean, keep listening. We love you.
You either love them or you hate them. There's a lot of people that don't like U2, and I understand because they're very they're like what you think about in terms of like stadium rocking band that like everyone knows, that's like super glitzy, or at least they were in a few phases of their career. But you know, they're an Irish band, four original members from Dublin, Ireland, that got started back in the 80s, and they're still together and they're still making amazing music. But yeah, May 26th, 2005, Tone.
Yep.
Yeah, my 21st birthday. I don't even know why I had to reference my 21st birthday. Probably because it was kind of a blur.
Should we cut that out now?
Probably because it was kind of a blur. 21st birthday. But
Yeah, I was 20, so I couldn't meet you out for drinks before, unfortunately.
Yeah, I turned 21 that day. Boston. U2 is playing what was known as the Fleet Center in Boston. Now the TD Garden, and they rebuilt it. But yeah, man, that was an incredible show. We made a little write-up on our Instagram page to kind of rehash that. I got a little on the deep end in terms of speaking super deep on how it felt. But anyone that is a fan of U2, I think they can kind of relate with those feelings because they're already kind of a religious band to an extent, although they kind of identify as universal. But they were kind of a Christian Catholic band or something in that realm for a while. But there was a feeling in that room and in that performance, even just that tour, that was very special. And it was our first time seeing U2 for me and for Tone. And I don't know, I've been moved ever since. So.
Absolutely. That show that day, I mean, I've been going to concerts now for 18 years. And this is 4 years into my concert going experience, and I have yet to top it. I've seen some really cool stuff since then. Obviously, we still talk about it here. Many of bands that have been, very close to top, but this show, this group, this room of people, which was 18,000 plus. Nate was down on the floor. Our buddy Rob got him tickets, and they were down on the floor, which is I'm super jealous of. But I mean, I got that later on when I saw them the second time. I was second row from the top, and this is one of those cookie cutter basketball arenas that you're way up there. I was straight on from the band. I remember getting there, finding my seat. I went with my neighbor. She was a person I grew up next door for 15 years, and we went to that show together. She's Irish, so she was super excited to see U2 for the first time as well. And it was just, from start to finish, an otherworldly experience. I can't even. I listened to City of Blinding Lights again the other day because they opened with that song on that show, and I found videos on YouTube that weren't as good as the actual experience, obviously, but I was still getting goosebumps and chills and feeling like this is something that I'm never going to recreate. So yeah, it was a badass day, man. Like they were just at the peak of their powers. They were on tour for Vertigo, for How to Dismantle an Atomic Bomb, the Vertigo tour, and they played everything I wanted to hear, and they just sounded so good, and the room was very, very captivated by them. And they did 3 shows, right? That we were the middle show of the 3, Nate.
Yeah, exactly. It was a 3-day residency, and there's obviously a lot of Irish culture in Boston, so I think playing Boston for U2 is probably a special stop for their tour. But yeah, I remember that show so vividly because I went down with Rob, and my brother met us down there and had a few drinks with us before we went to the show. And I really wanted him to go, but it was obviously completely sold out. And dealing with scalpers trying to get a ticket, but it was just not going to happen.
In Boston, at the end of their American leg, not going to happen.
Yeah, it was not likely that was going to work out. So, but yeah, that show, I mean, it's weird because we talk about live music a lot, and like I try to like not say it's the best show I've ever been to because I've been to so many great shows, and there's so many different types of music. We referenced Slipknot earlier. Like, how do you compare Slipknot to like U2? You know,
right.
Or like Woodstock '99 to, seeing a band in a club that eventually got huge. Like, it's hard to like nail it to one, but there was just something. There's so many things about that show that makes it number one. And then obviously having my 21st birthday the same day makes it extra special. And you might think I was like completely wasted, but I remember the show front to back. Like I didn't miss a beat. Like I was just so thrilled to see him, and had been following this band since middle school. So to finally see them was like I don't know. I can only imagine like being a teenager and then finally seeing Led Zeppelin back in the day or something like that.
Yeah, we've been listening to these guys forever, and it was pretty badass. And I remember this is early on in the cell phones having texting. Obviously, this is '05. There wasn't iPhones for all of us. I remember texting and like asking Nate, like, "What are you wearing? I'm trying to look at you down on the floor. Like, you guys are ants down there. Like, wave to me, bro."
Was it T9 word?
Oh yeah.
Oh,
I
yeah.
had one of those like not a sidekick, but something that like flipped up and it was like you had a keyboard.
Oh, you had that one? I had just the
Something
regular,
like that, yeah.
the Nokia brick. And it's just like,
Which still works today.
yeah, snake and everything.
So I get a confession. Outside of probably The Unforgettable Fire, I've never listened to besides that album, a full U2 album. And I'm saying that because I went back in prep, because I knew you guys we were gonna talk about this tonight, to look at the set list for like the tours around that era.
Mm-hmm.
And for someone who has not intentionally listened to U2 outside of that album, I recognize like half the set list.
Oh, nice.
So even for the casual fan, like you can still hang. But
Mm-hmm.
knowing you guys, and I would guess collectively, you guys have seen, I'm not going to say 4 figures, but 3 figures, in the hundreds of shows. For both of you guys to say that show is up there, it's like, it must have been special.
Oh, yeah.
It must have been special.
Yeah, speaking of referencing things on YouTube for archived footage, like there's some really, actually I have a DVD from that tour. I think it was, I can't remember where it was shot. It was definitely not that Boston show, but they did the same. Obviously, like a production like this is very much not rehearsed, but it's like it's a whole stage production. You know what I mean? So that show is documented in this DVD, and a lot of what's on YouTube. But it was so awesome, man. It was so cool, and they're a very universal band, so they speak to all cultures and all walks of life. And I think that's why there's an extra layers of special there.
And that was kind of around the time that obviously they were like the band of the world at that point. Like they're probably one of the top bands in the world, if not the top band in the world, as far as money goes, as far as what they could put on for a live show. They're selling out massive venues. They're the mighty and powerful U2 35 years in. And that was about when they started to like really experiment and throw some stuff together to make the live show even more. Like they spent some cash on those live shows starting in about 2003 or 4 or 5, right about when we saw them. So we got to see kind of the beginnings of that. And then they'd done that around, like you've said, Nate, they've got DVDs of all that stuff. I know the Evolution tour a few years back was huge, and they did like a big 360 stage, and Bono's strutting around and all. I mean, he was doing it back then too. He knows he's Bono. I'm not going to give
Yeah.
He is like, I am Bono. Everybody knows he's Madonna. He knows what he is, right? He's just the biggest one-name star in the world at that point, especially.
Yeah, he's like a John Lennon in a different era in a lot of ways, very much peacekeeper, very involved with world politics and world peace. And yeah, in that he was promoting a lot of things for the Red Campaign, which is to help raise money for a foundation, nonprofit. And yeah, U2 was huge then. They still are, but that was kind of an interesting peak for them, because commercially, that's one of the rare commercial things that works, because it's not coming from how many records can we sell, even though that is an agenda. But it was Bono, and the band has used that kind of spotlight for a lot of political and social change, which I think added a layer of compassion that made that show and the band and their ethos very strong. It's like, oh, this band isn't just about being some mega pop band. It's like there's some social change here that we can all identify with, which is, life's hard, and there's places in the world where people can't even get a meal. And Bono and the band have helped any kind of relief to make those ends meet, and it's still an ongoing challenge, of course. But
so if you had Nate brings up charity in the pool, how many minutes in are we, Twan?
50.
Nice. So drink if you had 50 minutes. Nate, I love you, bro. You got a huge heart. That's why you are you, man. So Is there anything like hearing an Edge, solo coming into an album though, or coming
Oh,
into a
man.
song live? You're just like, oh yeah, that's the Edge. Nobody else can sound like the. I mean, people can try, but it's not the Edge unless he's doing it.
Yeah, Tom DeLonge tried with Angels and Airways.
Tom DeLonge's tried. I know Brand New did on a couple songs. There's actually from their leaked demos a song that they had titled at the time, the one where Vin tries to sound like the Edge.
That's
Oh, yeah.
awesome.
It's out there. Right? People know the Edge is the Edge, man. That wah wah pedal and what he does, it just nobody else can do it like he does it.
So yeah,
Actually,
that's awesome.
I'm going to backpedal. I've heard 2 U2 albums in full. You know what the other one was?
Nice.
The one that Steve Jobs put on my iPhone.
Oh yeah, we've talked about that. Yeah, Apple and U2 put this out here. Everybody will love it. No, we hate you. Don't do that. If I download it myself, though, I'm in.
When I was referencing love or hate, that's where the hate comes in. A lot of people just, oh, I hate that fucking man. They like hacked my phone. It's like, nah, it wasn't them, but yeah, understandable.
And they just gave you free music. Like, what the frig are you pissed about?
That's so good. Yeah, I do they still tour?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I saw him a couple 5 years ago. Same venue, but I got to be on the floor this time, which was by accident. And I'll tell that story another time because it's a good one, and I want to give it the time that it needs. But yeah, they still tour, and they still are awesome. Bono's obviously they're older and they don't move as well as they used to, and he doesn't quite hit the notes the way he used to. But he's like 60 something, right? I mean,
yeah.
But he's still Bono, man. He's pulling girls up on stage, and he's putting them in videos. And I think they had a Periscope going at one point. It was cool. I'll talk about it at some point on a later date because it's probably a top 6 concert for me. So those guys occupied 2 of my top 6 or 7 concerts ever.
Yeah, U2's still crushing it. I saw them on that tour, that one you saw, Tone, 10 years ago in LA, and it was also, well, the one I went to was the day after my birthday because my birthday I spent down in San Diego, but scheduled some work travel. Meetings around the LA stop. They did a residency at the LA Forum, and I went to the 27th, so it was like exactly like 10 years after that show that we went to, and it was great, like you said. But that first show, I don't know, there's something about it that was so different. Maybe they're younger. I was 21. Everything.
I've always equated it to a religious experience. I'm not super religious as a rule, but I've always equated it to this. Everybody in this room is one right now, and like I was hugging old ladies in my row, like
oh, nice.
We were all on the verge of tears. Like it was something about that everybody was just happy to be where they were, and I've felt that it shows in the past with the people I'm with, or even part of a decent part of that crowd, but I've never felt like I was part of a gigantic entity, a 20,000 person everybody's into this. This is why we're all suspending everything right now to be here and in this moment and not with other things.
Yeah. That's why live music's amazing. That's why we don't want it to go away.
And that's why we're still talking about it now.
15 years later.
15 years later. And then 20 years later is...
What happened then? What happened 20 years later?
20 years later.
The segment.
The segment. What you've been all waiting for. Yeah, 2000, the year 2000. Tony, you want to do the Conan?
Yeah, so in the year 2000. If anybody's familiar with Conan O'Brien, they used to do that bit in the 97, 98, and then they did it even after the year 2000.
Yeah.
Great bit. Go YouTube those because they're hysterical.
Yeah, year 2000 segment. I was super excited to get this going on this podcast because it's such an iconic year. It's obviously the change for a lot of bands and iconic albums. So we all kind of did a deep dive on an album each, different kind of genres per se, I guess you'd say, but also just super influential and just staple albums of 2000. And so, yeah, we're going to kind of go into those details a little bit.
Yeah, and I think that's the key is like a ton of great albums came out in 2000. And we'll likely have this as an ongoing segment, but to kick us off, we wanted to really focus on, I would say, genre defining, at least in one of the cases, maybe in all of them. But yeah, we all took one for a deep dive, and we're all very versed in these albums. I mean, these are what we really grew up on. If you think about 20 years, so that's the segment. And who wants to start?
Ooh, this is tough. They're all three.
They're all really good. Yeah. I can go first if you guys want.
Yeah, let's do it.
All
right,
Let's do
cool.
So all three of these albums hit three different genres, right? And we were 15, 16 when they came out.
14.
You were you were 14 for some of them. Yeah,
Yeah,
if it
20's
was
the young
late,
one.
if it was late in the year, you were 15. though.
Right. It's true.
Yeah. So, and we all know what Nate's birthday is now. So,
Yeah, exactly.
but yeah, the album that I chose, and we have a whole list of 45 of them, but this one was a big follow up to an album that was very, very large for this band. It was Kid A by Radiohead. So Radiohead is coming off the Bends and then OK Computer, right? And those two albums were, especially OK Computer, were massive for them. And
So big. Yeah.
I remember, Nate, before you moved to California, I remember watching what was the name of that DVD they did? Meeting People is Hard or something like that.
Oh shoot. Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
And the Radiohead DVD that came out in between OK Computer and Kid A, and it was like them kind of on the press tour for OK Computer and live for that, and how they were just kind of gassed by the whole thing. Like they were done with being Radiohead and done with all the press and the people and the the stuff that went along with big band, and they were big at this point. So they went back into the studio. They got together and kind of went in a completely different direction. There's some elements of this on OK Computer, but they went full on like electronic and kind of unplugged a little bit from the guitars, changed their sound completely. And at the time, obviously not super well received, but they, it became a classic as far as like electronic kind of pop, kind of rock records went. And the funny thing is they used the same producer, Nigel Goodrich. He was the same producer as the OK Computer album, and that album is a little more rock oriented. It's got Karma Police, it's got Airbag, which is probably my favorite Radiohead song. And then they went in a completely different direction and kind of went more synthy and computery and keyboardy. And it didn't work out early, but it ended up being essentially a scene classic as far as that type of music went. Probably one of the first, if not the first album to fully utilize the internet as a means to promote it. They obviously were putting songs out as singles, but they didn't make any music videos for it. They did a lot of stuff through the internet. It was available promotionally as a stream early on, and in 2000, think about 2000, not a lot of people had the wherewithal to stream an album. It was probably a lot of dial-up still. I think we were still on, or just barely into cable internet at that point at my house. So they're using the internet to stream an album and get it out there. That's ahead of its time, right? I mean, and they're the band that ended up being one of the first bands to put an album out and do the pay what you want thing with In Rainbows after this. So they've always been kind of on the forefront as far as this goes. They did a lot of bootleg performances and videos from fans put on the internet. That was kind of something that had not been done before as far as promotional goes. It was their first #1 album in the U.S., which is kind of crazy if you think about it. Like the Bends was really big. You'd think OK Computer might have made it there, but it didn't.
Pablo
Kid
Honey,
A-
maybe. Pablo. Oh, that was the first. Yeah, so maybe not with that one, but
OK Computer would have been probably the one you would think, but because of OK Computer, this album went #1 to probably some upset people. But it ended up being, I mean, if you go back to it now, it's a great record front to back. It's just different. They like to do. I think I'm gonna go Key Tracks for me right now. Key Tracks, Everything in Its Right Place, which is the album opener, doesn't sound like a Radiohead song at that point. It does now. It sounds absolutely like a Radiohead song now. But if you go back to that time, it sounds very synthy and poppy, and they're messing with Tom York's vocals, and there's not a lot of, you don't hear a lot of band, you don't hear a lot of guitar, you don't hear a lot of the drums. It's just very keyboard and Tom York, and that's what you're gonna get. But that song's really cool. The national anthem is a fun song. There's a lot of horns towards the end that are kind of funky and weird.
I revisited it recently, a couple nights ago, and I was like, I don't remember this track, and I was really vibing with it though.
The second half of it, right? The second half of it's all horns, and they're just here's this horn, and then here's this horn, and then it's just fun.
Just big
right?
band. It feels very big band.
And it's completely different than Everything in Its Right Place, which is kind of crazy to me. Optimistic is probably my favorite track on the record.
Oh yeah.
That's a kind of straightforward rock song, and that's probably why it's my favorite track on the record. But that song could have fit in with OK Computer. How to Disappear Completely, I think, is an underrated Radiohead song. I listened to it again today for the second or third time this week just to prep for this, and it just it's a vibe. Like there's a feeling of sadness. There's a feeling of we don't want to be around all these people anymore. We want to just kind of withdraw into ourselves, which they obviously did. Some would say to a fault if you go all the way to the King of Limbs situation where it's just all electronic and they're not even a band really anymore. They've come out of that sense, but that song is kind of the starts of that. And then Idiotech is another big one that was a single and a very poppy, very synthy situation that is, it's almost like some of the bands that you would hear in the late 80s that were like new wavy, like they kind of brought new wave back 20 years after. So this album was crazy to me. It's a complete shift from what they were as a band. There were a couple pieces of OK Computer that sounded sort of like this, but they were more of a rock band back then, right? So 3 years later, they're putting this album out. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I mean, my two standout tracks are Optimistic and Idiotech. For me, I mean, I'm not the biggest Radiohead fan, and that's not a negative. It's actually, I do like them, and I get the hype, but I don't always go back and listen to them. However, again, another backpedal here. I listened to this album in the last week, and I get the hype. Like if you go on, if you search, a lot of the, RollingStone.com or any of those sites, and type in like Radiohead albums ranked, Kid A is one on all of them, on pretty much all of them. So I do get it. For me, I'm an In Rainbows guy because that's the album I listened to the most in the moment. I was a little late to the game, but I remember hearing Optimistic and Idiotech in the moment in 2000.
Yeah, I love this album, and it's a pretty complex band. So it's not easy to get into them, even though there's some cool like melodic singing elements. But I can imagine Twan, depending on how you get into them, it's not an easy one. It's such a weird, diverse band. If it wasn't for my brother, I probably wouldn't have had the introduction to this band like I had, and I think it would have probably taken all the way to In Rainbows to understand what was going on here. But In Rainbows is also such a fantastic album to get into the band because it's so front to back. But yeah, I'd already been into them. So when Kid A came, I was kind of like, I was ready. I was like, I went to the record store day of, and it was kind of thing ready to grab it on the day that it was released. But Everything in Its Right Place, like that song as an opener for an album, like, wow, like way to set the tone. Like it's a killer jam.
Well, and it starts off kind of just Tom York singing in his falsetto, everything, and it just like gets into, and then more stuff gets added as the song goes on, which is really cool. And I mean, not that if you have a little straight drink and listen to it, you might be all right. It's a cool vibe as far as how that song goes from start to, and then it like kind of closes out with just the keyboard synth stuff at the end. That's just kind of this is how this is gonna fade out. It's a great opening track. But if you're a fan of the Bends, it might be a little different for you to try to get into this. So Pablo Honey, the Bends, pretty straightforward rock records, and then OK Computer is mostly a rock record with a little bit of a departure here and there, but this is a complete departure as far as that stuff goes.
So does this album pass the 20-year test?
Yes, for me, yes.
I think it does.
I would say 100%. Yeah. If anything, when Tone is talking, my mind's always just like spinning in all these different directions. And when Tone is talking, I was like, 1999 into 2000, it felt like we were kind of going into the future, kind of like 2019 going into 2020. And now like it really is, because we're going to hazmat suits for shows and stuff like that. But like, but this Radiohead album kind of has that futuristic element to it. With the synths, and it's just like Tony, you're saying, it's such a departure from prior that it was like, oh wow, they're kind of changing direction, and it makes sense because we're going into 2000, so everything felt like, oh, we're going to go into this amazing paradigm shift in terms of how songs sound, and this was kind of a precursor to that to an extent. It was just an experiment kind of, but shows their intense diversity as a band.
Yeah, and the kind of crazy thing is they recorded this alongside Amnesiac, which is the album that came out after it the following year. Which, if you think about it, like this album at the time was not super loved. I mean, it ended up gaining that cult following as far as, and not even cult, like they're still a huge band, but as far as this album was concerned, at the time it was kind of not panned, but it had trouble. And Amnesiac was kind of more of the same, right? Because it was recorded around the same time. So if you listen to Amnesiac, it's probably even a little more experimental, a little more kind of out of left field. The crazy thing to me, I was looking at the kind of the Napster-ish numbers and the streaming numbers. This streamed 400,000 times, and today that's a pretty good number, right? In 2000, that's freaking crazy. Like how is that even possible with the way internet was back then? People don't remember but 2000, the internet is a very different world than it is today. Like it's all in our pockets now. It wasn't in our pockets until 10 years ago, maybe. You know, really for the better 6 years ago, it was really in our pockets. Well, the fact that this was streamed that many times in the year 2000 is people on their computer at home downloading the album to listen to it or streaming the album to listen to it. That's nuts. That's a lot of people.
It is a lot, and I think you're right. Like that was the cusp between dial-up and cable, and if it was the cable, if it was the dial-up era, you had to really want. If 400,000 people, that shows you how in demand they were, because a lot of times you would download it overnight and it would cut out. You'd wake up and it didn't download. You know.
Yeah.
So that I'm with you. That's very surprising.
Well, you know what I just thought of is, I'm just trying to think. Those numbers are alluding toward a demographic that's tech savvy, I think, because Radiohead has like an interesting. Well, I think they have a fan base that spawns all walks of life, but I just remember the Kid A era was very much like, and I'm calling myself a geek, like kind of like geeky, like tech savvy, like into, you know, I'm gonna go the route. I'm gonna actually wait and make this album download kind of thing. Whereas if it was some kind of like garage band, you know, that just wouldn't be the case. So it kind of goes in tandem to an extent, and especially with the theme of this album. So
obviously promoters didn't like it. I know that the song "Optimistic," there's the line, and this is where was it? I just had it. The best you can is good enough. That came from Tom's girlfriend at the time, because he was kind of down. He was down on the process of recording the album and was like, I don't know if this is going to be any good. Like, we're just kind of done. So this is a very pivotal moment for them. Like they were kind of on the verge of not being a band anymore. Like just being sick of not each other necessarily, but just the life. And he's like writing "Optimistic," which is not optimistic, but she's like, the best you can is good enough. And he's like, oh, I'm going to put that in the song. And I mean, I love that song. That's a great song.
It is a timeless album. Like, if that dropped in 2020, people would still be into it. You know what I mean? Because a lot of bands are Radiohead clones. Like, they've mirrored themselves after that sound, and that's a testament to the album. I mean, I get it. I'm kind of a Radiohead convert. Like, I in 2020, I get the hype. In 2000, probably a casual fan. I was probably a casual fan back then.
I think I was crossing over from casual to like, oh, I completely get what's going on here. Even though I was a fan before, but it was like such a change in sound that it was like, it's hard to like grasp. You're like, but I kind of like OK Computer.
Yeah, right. And they played, just getting back to what they did around this time, they did some like big kind of tent shows in Europe where they just put a big tent up and people would show up in a field somewhere, which is kind of crazy. It's, I mean, that's kind of a precursor to some of the festivals we saw in the mid 2000s, right? Like, just here's a big tent, show up, and here's Radiohead. Like, okay, yeah, I'll go to that. And same thing with they came to the U.S. They played smaller venues by themselves, and then did some of the bigger venues on the second leg with Sigur Rós, but mostly by themselves. And they recorded, I might be wrong, the live recordings, which is a good, go back and peep that if you've never listened to that. That's a fun live kind of record. Has the national anthem on it. It has Optimistic, some other stuff. So that's cool.
Wow.
We ready for the next one?
Yeah, classic album. Nate, you want to go? You want me to go, or do you want me to go?
They're both amazing. I know them. This is the first time we told each other.
You go
guys.
with me going?
The first time.
Right, I'll go. So we're gonna transition genres big time.
Big
and
time.
this artist needs no introduction. The album really needs no introduction. Whether you like hip hop, rap, or not, this artist kind of transcended genres, and we're talking about Eminem. So the album is Marshall Mathers LP, comes out in 2000, and kind of Tone, to take your approach, back up a little bit. So what happened before then? So he broke on to mainstream in like 98, 99. So Slim Shady LP comes out. He hits you with My Name Is, super catchy, poppy, a lot of tongue-in-cheek humor. Follows that up with Guilty Conscience, which that's when you knew he had the Dr. Dre backing.
Yep.
That whole Dr. Dre endorsement. So instant credibility. So that comes out, big success. And after that, before Marshall Mathers comes out, he has that feature on Dre's What Forgot About Dre that was on Chronic 2001, which came out ironically in 99. And I think he smoked Dre on that song, M's verse. Totally smoked him. So this is all leading up to the major label sophomore album. So I know he had that Infinite. Was it Infinite?
Infinite. Yep.
Infinite. So as far as major label, this was his sophomore album. So channeling back to Greg Bergdorf from Zebrahead, episode 9 or whatever it was, you have your whole life to put out your debut, but you only have a year to put out your follow-up in the album after that.
Yep.
So this is a lot of pressure, a lot of pressure. So he drops Marshall Mathers LP in 2000. So a couple kind of personal memories for me. We were freshmen in high school. It was second half of that year, of the school year. It was in the spring, and I remember listening to this on my Discman.
Yeah.
And I remember specifically being, it was after gym class and just having the headphones in, and I bought it the day of. It was one of those Slim Shady, real Slim Shady. I love that song on the radio. I need that album. And that's when albums dropped on Tuesdays. So if you're an OG, you know that dropped on a Tuesday. So I remember doing that. And then also that summer, I played summer baseball. So senior league baseball, 13, 14-year-old team. And we did the summer league. I think we won the state tournament, and we're traveling down to like Vermont, New Jersey to do regional tournaments. And all my teammates' parents drove us. So one of my friends' dads had a minivan. So there were like 6 of us, 13, 14-year-olds in a minivan. And what was the soundtrack that whole trip was Marshall Mathers LP. And I remember specifically my buddy's dad being like, "What the hell is this?" Like questioning if he should even let us listen to it. Like, I mean, if
he should have been questioning it.
If you know, you know. Like So I remember even as a 14-year-old, you knew how ridiculous the album was. So that's some early memories. So a couple comments, then I'll open it up here. But I would say my reaction to the album, objectively, it's a classic. It's a classic album for any genre. For in genre, I would say it's a near masterpiece. I don't think it is because of a couple things. There's 2 songs that I always skip. Always skip. And it's been like this since the day I bought it. Remember Me, the one with Sticky Fingers from Onyx.
Yep.
Skip that back then. I skip it now. And obviously Kim. Like, I'm not going to listen to that.
Kim is a tough hang.
I'll say this. The first time I listened to Kim all the way through was like pretty recently. Like I always just skipped it. And if you know, you know. And then the other thing is near masterpiece is the lyrical content. As a 14-year-old, you think it's, funny and whatever. As a 34-year-old, it's like, I don't know if I need to listen to this.
Yeah. Yep.
But that's just a couple thoughts. For him, it transcends the genre. He was all over the Anger Management Tour, Warped Tour, early days. He was on TRL, MTV. I mean, he was huge.
Mm-hmm. The memories I have, Twan, you just kind of opened up the memory bank in terms of when I was first listening to this album, and it was on the way to Thunder River to ski. The school had a program, the rec program, where you'd buy like kind of a season pass type thing to ski through the school, and they'd provide transportation, and it'd be every Sunday in the winter. and someone had this album, and I listened to it, and I was like just like floored because I was like was into some hip hop, but I was mostly into the albums that we had referenced in other episodes, like the Free Willy soundtrack and Nirvana Unplugged. So like this is kind of like new territory for me, and I was like, wow, this is like it just seemed like, especially with the skits and stuff, that I was like just listening to some kind of like comedy album sometimes. I was like, what is this? This just it doesn't really make any sense. But it was intriguing at the same time because his voice is so like unique. He's got this, especially that album. He's got a very like young,
whiny
like parody thing going on, but it makes his own little sounds for the segments or in the song bits, like making the sound of a chainsaw and stuff like that. Yeah. And I was like, this is like really weird, man. But I like it for sure. But that was the first time I heard it, and then I did the same thing. I went and bought it. And it was well advertised. You know, it was a lot of money trade spend on making this album what it was, but well deserved because it is an iconic album, and the content and the time and place. There's no other time that this album could have come out. If it was earlier, it wouldn't have worked. If it was later, it would have been too late. Yeah, it was like the exact perfect time, infrastructure wise, album wise, him as a person, like. It's an album that just kind of blows me away.
So, talking about early Eminem, in '98, we were on I think we're in middle school, 8th grade, Washington D.C. trip, and I remember Slim Shady LP and just listening to that on the bus and being like, I shouldn't be. I know, I'm 13, I should not be listening to this. Like, my parents would not understand why. They'd like be like, what are you doing? But like that's what we had. Like that was one of those. That was part of the appeal. For our, he kind of hit something for our age, our group of friends, our time period as preteen, teen into high school type of stuff, where he knew how to find us, and not that we agreed with what he was doing, but we were like, okay, he's taboo, I'm gonna listen to him, and he played that up to a T on those first 2 albums.
Yeah.
To the point where you're right, Twan. There's songs that I will not listen to. I listened to Kim all the way through for the first time in probably ever as well the other night in prep for this, and I was like, this is hard to do. I'm not telling people to go listen to it because the rest of the album has some pretty solid bangers on it, and lyrically he's as good as anybody at this point. You know what's funny? I just looked through the track listing of this album and then Eminem Show, which came out a couple days ago, 18 years ago. Wow. So much more mature. Like there's just, and that album I did what you did, Twan. I put it on my Discman and I didn't turn it off, and I walked around school. I was in the middle of class listening to it. I was a decent student, so no one gave me shit. But yeah, those songs don't have what some of these songs have. But at the same time, there's some really masterful songs on this record, and that's why it's pretty damn close to a front to back. Drug Ballad, amazing. Yeah. Just an amazing. It's a dance song like he had on Slim Shady with what's the name of it? It's middle of the album, similar to this one, and this song is just perfect. Like as far as a Slim Shady Eminem song goes, and Criminal. I mean, you can't.
And that's the album closer, Criminal.
Yeah, and you can't beat the lyricism on that record or that song. It's just perfect. And there's some stuff in there that's really not great, but it's an awesome song. Like he just does, it's just Eminem being Eminem and pushing the buttons that you want pushed. And then Stan was obviously huge, right? Stan was just a big song, and still would to this day. It made Dido. It turned Dido into a thing. Like without Stan, there's no Dido. So yeah, it hit me again hearing it for the first time in quite a while. The guy was obviously, he still is very talented. He's still doing stuff today. So one of the better lyricists we'll ever hear.
Nate, you mentioned something I wanted to bring up, which was earlier today, I thought to myself, if this album came out today, how would I like it? And my immediate thought was, it couldn't come out today. Exactly what you were saying. He nailed the time and the place. So then I flipped that around and said, well, what if I was 34 when this came out back in 2000? It would not have the same impact. And it gets down to, like you said, he scratched that itch, that taboo itch that you have when you're 14, 15, whatever it was. The stars aligned. And I still do come back to this album for select songs. Criminal, he still does that live. I saw him last year. He still does
Yep.
Criminal. He still does obviously Real Slim Shady. He does The Way I Am. He does Stan. There's a few others he'll still play. But yeah, I have a couple factoids if you guys want to hear them on this album.
Absolutely.
So one of them is, well, actually, one of them is a little story from the label. So you remember with Greg from Zebrahead from channeling a couple episodes ago, the
Yep.
record label said, "Hey, we want a Sugar Ray Fly, right? We
Mhm.
want the big single." So for this album, when they were in the studio, Eminem finishes recording, and the label says, "Hey, we need a single. There's no single we can work with." So guess what song he comes back with initially?
Stan.
He comes back
The Way
with
I Am?
The Way I Am, which is a middle
Yeah.
finger
Okay.
to like being a celeb.
All of it. Yeah.
So
Okay.
that's a total Eminem move. And then if you think back to the CD, the skit that's leading up to The Way I Am is the Steve Berman skit,
Which is a great skit.
which is a great skit where he's basically like, "Fix this or it's not coming out," and then it leads
Wow.
into The Way I Am, and then
Awesome.
he comes back to the label after that, and then he gives them the Slim Shady, Real Slim Shady.
Yeah.
Yep.
So that's one factoid. The other one is it went diamond. It actually sold 11 million albums in the U.S. And the other cool thing I saw just in doing some prep for this was it actually went gold on its own in the first 4 weeks of the album. So
Isn't
in the
that
first
nuts?
week, it sold 1.8. Second week, 800,000. Third, 600,000. And then the fourth, just over 500,000.
Jeez.
That
And
was
that'll
back
never be
when
done.
albums did that, right? I
Yeah.
mean, that just doesn't. That will not happen again. That was a time when that could happen. It won't
Yeah.
happen again.
Drake couldn't do it. Adele couldn't do that. I mean, those are the ones that would come close. Not even close. Like the close for the time. Closest for the time.
If they were big back then, yes. I think a piece of this and the reason he was as popular as he was he was kind of the anti-boy band at the time and the
Yeah.
anti-Britney
Yep.
Spears and Christina Aguilera stuff. So there was new metal, there was boy band / girl band, and then there was Eminem. And Eminem was the only thing like Eminem, and he was
Yeah.
just shitting on all of that other stuff. So to
Wow.
have him be the voice of I don't want this, I don't want that, you're gonna have me,
Man.
obviously made him a big deal, right?
I've never heard it like that, and that's really cool perspective because he essentially had a monopoly on his style and that genre to an extent. Wow, that's a really cool point, Tone.
Well,
Yeah,
and it's to be said, the lyrics of his songs were to provoke and they were obviously over the top and a little bit intense at times,
Yep.
but they weren't him. I don't think they were to kind of provoke everybody and to make everybody feel a little uncomfortable in their chair, right? That's what they
Yeah.
wanted. They wanted you to be like, oh God, he said that. Oh my God, he's making fun of gay people. And then he's
Yeah.
friends with Elton John and does stand with Elton John. Like he's
Exactly.
obviously not that guy. He's just doing his thing.
Yeah,
And-
and three
yeah.
personalities. Three personalities with Marshall Mathers, Eminem, and Slim Shady. So we can kind of like ping pong between three different like personas per se. I mean, it's the same person, but yeah. Wow, man.
And
What are
that's
you
why I
saying?
get back to like, if I was 34 back then, I would have been able to see through that. I would have been able
Yeah.
to understand it was all for a rise
hmm
to some extent. But last question, last trivia question, then we can move on to yours, Nate. What was the first What was the first song he recorded for this album?
Hmm.
Give me a hint.
It'll give it away. It'll give.
Okay. Shit. Bitch, please too. That's actually, I think it's in the next one.
No, it's on
I
that
don't
one.
know.
It's on that
Am
one.
we-
Is it?
Amityville?
All right.
Kim was the first.
Really?
Oh God.
Yes.
Well,
Oh,
I
wow.
mean, 07 Bonnie and Clyde, or what? 03 Bonnie and Clyde will do that to you, I guess.
Yeah.
Wow.
But
Yeah.
I would say still a classic album. So I'll ask the same question.
Mhm.
Does it hold up 20 years later? My answer is yes.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yep.
I agree. I agree, and I also agree with the fact that I skipped those tracks. I did it then. I do it now.
Yep.
And if it
me
wasn't
too.
for those two tracks, it would be a front to back. And I guess it is a front to back in terms of what those songs represent as an album flow, because he was psychopathic and Kim is essentially a song about murdering, and
Yep.
and so they kind of make sense in terms of an album flow, but they are kind of skippable tracks because they're either too hard to to listen to.
Well,
Or
Yeah, and if you listen to the next album, the Eminem Show, I think
Mhm.
the song about having trouble with Kim is "Say Goodbye to Hollywood," and it's way friendlier than the other ones are. So,
yeah,
and I love say I think that's probably the best song on that album, or one of the best songs on that album.
Soldiers.
Um,
Or I'm a
yeah,
soldier.
Soldier's good.
Yeah.
Soldier's good too. Sing for the Moment's good. I mean, that we'll get into that album again. I'm sure.
Till
at
I
some point.
Collapse, one of the best songs
Yeah,
ever.
Till I Collapse
Yeah.
is a great, and it ain't a hit till Nate Dogg spit. I mean, let's be honest, that's a great record too, great song too. So there's some, it's a little bit more user friendly, I guess, as it were. But I loved that album just as much.
Yeah, I think Eminem might be in the running for On Fire.
Yeah.
Oh, definitely.
Like that.
There was 4 in a row. Infinite's great. Listen to Infinite, it's great.
Yeah,
All right, Nate, what you got?
it's just it's cool that these albums came out at the age that we were in, the history that was happening at the time of, you know, technological advancement, simultaneously with us being early in high school, with music still being tangible to CDs, in tandem with being young and impressionable. It's just like we kind of have like a pretty sweet life in terms of music. I think that's why we created this podcast, because a lot of this
Definitely.
music that's timeless would only work with our generation, or if you were born in like the late 60s and like came up with like the Beatles and Zeppelin and stuff. There's a little middle era there that you might have got tail ends of either or, you know, like 80s with U2 and stuff. But yeah, we're lucky because we got to come up when a lot of this stuff was just getting started. So Eminem will go down. You look up like the most iconic artists of all time. Eminem's in there. Radiohead's in there. This next band's not in there. I wouldn't say
It is for us, though. It is for us.
Yeah.
it is for us, and anyone that appreciates music on a very deep level, I think, can agree that this band is influential or a staple for heavy music, rock music, metal music. They really don't have a genre. We always try to identify what is this band, what, you know, category do we put them on the library shelf, and I don't really know, because Deftones is the band we're going to talk about here. Referenced them quite a bit. Hung out with a few of the guys a few times, and this album, White Pony, came out on June 20th, 2000. So we literally were like, you know, summer break was just starting. So talk about like time and place, like boom, out of high school. This heavy album that this band that I already like really loved with Around the Fur, which we referenced as my favorite Deftones album, and so I was super stoked on this album to drop. And again, actually kind of goes in tandem with Tone's selection with Radiohead, OK Computer, or sorry, what was it, Tone?
Kid A.
Yeah, Kid A.
Kid A,
Yep.
Kid A, yeah, because it's a complete, you know, shift in soundscape and writing ability and promotion and I mean just everything. So White Pony was dropped, and yeah, it's just a huge crazy shift for the band. Frank Delgado, he's the DJ for the band. He worked with them on Adrenaline and Around the Fur, but this is the first album where he was kind of introduced as a full-time member. So I remember opening up the booklet and seeing all members in there and being like, oh, who's this new guy? He's the DJ. And this is kind of the era of music where DJs were starting to be implemented into band lineups. So like Limp Bizkit, Crazy Town, Deftones. I feel like every new metal band had a DJ. It was just like the thing.
Incubus.
It
You
seemed
say
normal.
that? Incubus.
Yeah, Incubus. Yep. Yeah, it seemed normal to see a band on YouTube and a DJ in the background. It's like, oh yeah, it's normal now to see a DJ as part of a rock band or any kind of like, you know, regular instrument. But yeah, I was huge into Deftones and Around the Fur, and mainly through Napster actually. So I got into them through Napster and had songs from the first record, Adrenaline, like Engine Number 9 and stuff. So when I was kind of a fan leading up to this, I was pleasantly surprised, but also kind of like unsure, similar to some fans of the Radiohead on the Kid A from OK Computer. Like this is not as heavy as Adrenaline Around the Fur. This is, if anything, I don't know. It's like I wasn't a hardcore fan enough to be like, this is radio friendly, but it seemed like a shift.
It was way more melodic,
Way
Yeah.
more.
Yeah.
which is like a tribute to them as a band. Like they
Totally.
okay, we're a heavy band, but here we can actually do this too.
Mm-hmm.
And you did see elements of that on Around the Fur with Be Quiet and Drive. Like you knew they could do it, but this was way
That's
more
true.
polished too.
Yeah.
Way more
Yeah.
polished.
Yeah, no, and that's a really good point because there are some songs on Around the Fur that like allude to it, but it was so like sprinkled in, it just didn't seem like it was a main kind of I don't know, element to their band. But yeah, experimental, new wave. Chino's a big fan of that scene. Clearly, he came up in the '80s, so he's a big fan of like The Cure and bands like that. So he started playing guitar on this album for the first time. So it wasn't just Stephen Carpenter; it was now two guitarists, which makes the album a little bit louder and coming from two different angles. So if you listen to it in the headphones, there's a lot more guitar coming through.
Deftones.
Deftones, yeah. Yeah, shout out to Steph. Um, yeah, and so they recorded the album in West Hollywood, which I'm up there quite a bit, and Sausalito, which is across the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco, a place that me and my wife love. It reminds me of Maine a lot, only because of the harbor and so forth. But there's a vibe there, and there's a vibe in West Hollywood. So I feel like that those definitely had some, some influence on the album production and sound to an extent, just because when you see landscapes like that, you're just engulfed in it. But yeah, I mean, the album climbed the charts pretty quickly. It actually is their only album that went platinum. It went platinum in 2002. So for a band like Deftones, and yeah, they're not in the Rolling Stone Top 100 or whatever, but they are a platinum selling album band. Sorry, with that album coming from like essentially a metal band. That's something to say. It's not hard to sell that many records as that kind of band. But yeah, it's a kind of testament to Terry Date to an extent. He's the producer. He produced bands like Soundgarden, Fishbone, Pantera, Mother Love Bone from the grunge era, and so forth. But I don't know. I think what I started to realize as I listened to this album more that it's more of a storytelling album. There's more like things that I love about Pearl Jam. Like, oh, I can see this picture that's being painted for me, and it's no longer like, I don't know, something difficult to figure out. It's just like it's all out there, and I can just like either identify it or with it or not. But it's all there in front of me, and I can gravitate towards it and really put it's almost like a movie soundtrack to an extent. You can really kind of put some scenery to the songs.
What tracks stick out to you, Nate?
Oh man, it's a front to back album. But
yeah, there isn't a bad one, but like if you had to like, for me, it's like I love Passenger with Maynard.
Oh yeah.
I mean, talk about bringing melody into your album. Here's
Totally.
Maynard who can totally pull that off. So that's a fun kind of back and forth between Chino and Maynard and the music.
Maynard from Tool, yep, and A Perfect Circle that you referenced in a recent Instagram post.
Yep.
That song's that I actually put down Knife Party, Elite, and that song Passenger. But then I just wrote a bunch of others because there's also good. Digital Bath, Street Carp, I love.
Digital Bath is great.
I actually got a limited copy that came with Boys Republic, which I think is my favorite Deftones song ever, and it's not even like an official song.
I don't even know that song. I need to check that out.
Yeah, look it up.
It was a B-side to this album.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep. It was a yep.
Where the hell have I been? I'm a Deftones fan. Shit.
Yeah, find that stat. Find that ASCP.
Is it on B-sides and rarities?
No, it's not.
That's why I don't. Yeah, that's my bad.
I had a special edition copy of White Pony that had it as almost like a secret track, so that was cool.
No, I love Digital Bath is great. Change is obviously just an epic song.
Epic song.
And Back to School, the opener and the closer, it kind of comes full circle with the Back to School variation at the end. Yeah. It's a great record from front to back. You're right. There isn't really a bad song on there. It's just so good.
It's so good.
One of the things about, and Nate, you kind of alluded to this with like the picture the album paints. One of the things that Deftones, one of the many things I love about them is the album artwork, but two, it lends itself for the listener to draw their own conclusions. So I'll take like Incubus Morning View. The album cover is of a beach. Like it's intended to, the music is a soundtrack to the beach in my mind. But take Deftones, like this album, the artwork is very minimalistic. It's very minimal. It's just, hey, here's the outline of a horse or a pony. And that's all you get. And it's kind of a theme throughout a lot of their albums where, in the lyrics too, I mean, Chino never gets on interviews and talks about the meaning of songs. It's always intended to be very cryptic and vague and open-ended for you to paint your own canvas. I mean, you guys know me. Deftones is easily top 3 to 5 all-time bands for me, and this is up there. It's a top 10 album, realistically, for me.
Yeah.
And even now, I listen to it when I walk the dog. I listen to it headphones at work. It's classic. It's timeless.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely timeless. And I think when you're alluding to the artwork, it seemed like it was another shift because their first 2 albums were also kind of simplistic, I guess, to an extent. At least Adrenaline was. But this one almost seemed like it was like a brand, like the White Pony thing. I sense maybe because they've used so much of these graphics for their merch. But it's like it became like, oh, this is like a brand. So it kind of alluded more, or it kind of added more baggage to the fact that like, oh, this is more commercial friendly. But it really is not. And to the point where the label actually made them similar to the Eminem album, Marshall Mathers, before it came out, or even after it was released. Actually, they put it out, and they weren't getting the success the label wanted commercially. That they had them re-record and put out a song, "Back to School," as like a single. So,
this is for me. This is Deftones in their final form, right? Like they're very heavy. They're very in your face for the first couple of records. This introduces melody, but it also has that heaviness and that edge. And they kind of are that way from here on out, right? Like they always incorporate heavy, they always incorporate melodic, they always incorporate sounds. They always, they're constantly kind of changing, but not at the same time. This is why this is the first album for me that like hits home for me. Like they're gonna be this, and they're gonna be this from different but the same from here on out. Which is, I mean, that's why I love them. Not that they're constantly putting out White Pony. They aren't. White Pony is probably their best album, just because it incorporates everything for the first time. But they have other albums that do some of that too, like even self-titled a couple of years later. And I love Koi no Yoikon. I love that one so much. There's just there's some great records in there that they do this well, but they did it here first, and that's why I love this one.
Yeah,
and you're right. This was the pivotal moment for them, because if you jumped from Around the Fur to self-titled or Saturday Night Wrist, it would have been a very interesting jump, and they probably would have lost a lot of people along the way. But I remember Change being on MTV. Like they got traction with this, and I'm surprised it didn't go more than single platinum in hindsight.
That's true. Yeah, good point.
No, that's true.
I mean, just go put Digital Bath or Change in Digital Bath, especially in the headphones tonight. When you're done listening to this, put your headphones on, drown everything else out, and put that song on. It's just so perfect.
Yeah, it's kind of like the Clutch to that era. Clutch still plays theaters. Deftones still plays like theaters. Slipknot came up around the time as same time as Deftones, but they're selling out like amphitheaters and stadiums and stuff like that. So Deftones is they've kind of remained like this. I don't know. I don't want to say cult following, because a lot of people know who Deftones are, but I think it's a cool, in between size band to be in. As a band member, I can imagine that must be pretty cool to have the versatility to be like, you know what, we're gonna do a tour off of White Pony and play theaters. All right, cool. We're gonna grab Incubus and Taproot and do the Back to School tour, and we'll play some arenas, I guess, on this run, and then we'll go back to playing theaters again. Like, to have that kind of flexibility must be cool, because I know as a band, like, playing theaters and stuff is, you get some obviously intimate shows and maybe even better sound.
Well, it's funny we bring up Radiohead and Deftones in the same episode, because a lot of people, they say Deftones is the Radiohead of metal, which you couldn't say that in 98, 99. It was like, this was the turning point for them. And they arguably play bigger venues now than they did years and years ago. Like, I mean, I saw them in 2007 at probably a 1,500 cap, and I think that was, again, one of those club tours, one of those small venue stuff. But I mean, even last year they played that Bank of America Pavilion in Boston, the outdoor venue. I don't know what that holds, but that's huge, right?
That's a good sized venue. That's not a club, but not a gigantic outdoor amphitheater, so it's kind of in the middle, a couple of 4,000 to 6,000 tops, but it's a big venue. Yeah. And you're right. This is very similar to the divergence that Radiohead had with Kid A. This is kind of not a divergence, but an evolving sound for them, where they go from being that kind of heavy. There's some melodic aspects, but this is a little more melodic and has some change in what they do. No pun intended.
Yeah, I think this album was a good crossover to anyone that was kind of interested in heavy music. I think we touched on this on an episode where it was like, that's not my style of music, but I appreciate it. To like, oh, do you like The Cure? Yeah. Do you like Metallica? Yeah. Check out Deftones. Oh, awesome. Yep. All right, cool. This album actually
makes sense. That's a good way to put it. Yep.
Like it's a hybrid of different styles. Chino brings a lot of that 80s kind of the Smiths, Cure kind of vibe to it, which, I mean, it's a really unique thing to throw into metal because Stefan's a straight up shredder. He plays a 7-string with like Chino, and then you got Abe that's a really cool drummer with all sorts of different styles of music, jazz included. So yeah, they stand the test of time, but it's like it's the kind of music that almost shouldn't work, but it works, and maybe caters to a smaller crowd, but definitely a diehard crowd. And yeah, in terms of memories too, like we were young, so high school, and I was just getting into this kind of like hard, heavy type of music, and it really just changed everything about how I approach and appreciate heavier music. It put me into a whole new wave of heavier music, and if it wasn't for Deftones, I don't know if I would appreciate it like I do today.
I think you're right. I think they did the same thing for me, Nate. I was like, this and Nails, Nine Inch Nails are probably the two bands that got me into some of the heavier stuff that I like now. Mm-hmm. I liked it, but I always was like at an arm's length, and now I'm a little more opening and a little more into it. So yeah, this band is a band that could totally attribute that to, because there's so many aspects. They're not just this one-trick pony, not to, white pony, one-trick pony. They're not that. I know Chino was on recently with Zane Lowe, we're just waiting for him to come here because we would ask him legit nerd questions and not just, when's the new album coming out? But he talked maybe a reissue because it's 20 years old and calling it Black Stallion, which is a pretty badass like change off of that. I would buy that record right now.
Well, the other thing, talking about genres, is this album allowed them to distance themselves from nu metal. So if you're a metal purist, nu metal's like the cookie cutter,
the rap rock, right?
Yeah, it's like the Pizza Hut of pizza. You know what I mean? It's accessible. It's watered down. The ingredients stink.
That for Mike? That was for Mike. Yeah.
Yeah. One of our friends really likes Pizza Hut.
Loves Pizza Hut.
So yeah, this allowed them to, because when you think nu metal, you think Limp Bizkit, right? Which is watered down. I mean, it's just, some of the early albums are great, but then they kind of lost it. But this allowed them to shed that. And I know this album has elements of, there's some synth vibes, there's some shoegaze, there's melody, it's all over the place. And it was just a pivotal time for them in the genre. They escaped that nu metal.
Yeah, when people put them in when people put them in that nu metal category, I kind of balk at that. I'm like, I mean, maybe they came up around then, and there's some elements of it, but they're not a nu metal band, right?
Yeah. I mean, the first couple albums, there's some rap rocky stuff, but anyone that thinks that, they've clearly done themselves a disservice and dismissed them, and needs to check out some of the newer stuff.
Yep.
Or the last 20 years.
Yeah, there's so many good records from here to then. Yeah, awesome. Deftones. I mean, that's quite the run, those 3 albums there. A little Kid A from Radiohead, Marshall Mathers LP, and Deftones White Pony. Those are just 3 albums that came out 20 years ago, and we've got many more to kind of plug away at here as the year goes on. So you'll hear this again. Anything else on Deftones, guys? Or are we feeling good?
No, I'd say I'm good. I would say leave any other Deftones for future episodes, because I think we've
got more stuff.
We'll weave them in for sure.
Yeah. No, there's too much to cover. We're drinking a Deftones beer right now. Right?
I know, yeah. The Pog. I just had the Swerve City. Oh, so good. So good, Nate. Thank you.
Yeah, totally.
So yeah, that's going to be it for tonight. Again, check us out on the socials, Twitter, Instagram @PodioSlave, and then Gmail is PodioSlavePodcast @gmail.com. we will check you guys out next week. I think we had a pretty fun one in the idea to go forward coming next week. We got a fun one. So hit us up on those socials if you get a chance. And I don't know. Peace out, guys. Having a good time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for getting this far.
Peace, podheads.
Adios.